it's Reagan, and today I'm here to do my favorite video to do every single year, and that is to chat about my favorite books of 2018. In 2018, I read a total of 65 books, which translated into 31,000 pages. I read a lot of long books this year. Another thing I'm really proud of doing this year in terms of reading is, as you'll notice from a lot of my favorite books I'm going to talk about, this was kind of the year of the series for me. I read a lot of series, and not just the first book, but I was really good about reading the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth book in a series and really continuing on if I enjoyed it. Due to that, I have a lot of series I'm going to be talking about today, so without further ado, let's chat about the top 10 books I read this year. Per usual, these books are in no particular order. That would break my heart too much. It was already difficult to narrow it down to 10 books as I read so many incredible books this year, especially in the latter half of the year. I'd say the last 4 months of the year I read most of these books in some ways. I mean, I just read so many amazing books. It was just very difficult. But the first book I'm going to talk about is Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. This is the sequel to Nevermore, which also made my top 10 books last year. This has to just be my current favorite middle grade favorite series right now. It follows our main character Morgan Crow, who has been told her whole life that she is cursed. She's essentially blamed for every bad thing that befalls anyone in her town, but most of all she is blamed for her own curse that says she will die on the eve of her 11th birthday. But on this eve, she's actually swept away to this new magical land called Nevermore by a very quirky hotel owner who has a hotel that I would kind of describe as like the Grand Budapest Hotel, but on steroids. It can basically transform and become anything. It's magical and quite honestly whimsical and lovely to read about. From there, she enters a series of trials to enter this secret society. That's kind of what happens in the first one. It's just so clever and whimsical and lovely. I love every second of this series. The sequel, honestly, was even better than the first one. It really expanded on the world. We got to see elements of a magic school, which is always one of my favorite things to encounter in a story, and I just love Morgan as a main character and seeing her kind of grow into herself. I feel like this is going to be a very long series, so you're going to be seeing this book series on my channel for quite a long time, but it is just like the perfect middle grade series, and if you haven't picked it up, I implore you to give it a try. Next up is just another all-time fave, as all of these books are. It is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This is another series I feel like I have not shut up about since I started reading it on my channel. Earlier this year, I also made Clay read it. He loved it. This is just a eerie, dark, incredibly intense, dystopian, near-future novel by Neil Shusterman. It's set in a world where humanity has basically solved all of mankind's issues. Famine, poverty, corruption, all those things have been dealt with. Due to this, people can no longer die naturally. Therefore, society has basically granted individuals called Scythes the power to kill people. I think being ordained with such an intense responsibility would make Scythes very empathetic, but there are some Scythes that have been very much corrupted by this power. We follow in this series two Scythes in training as they basically become familiar with this new world of politics. Oh my gosh, this series is just so absolutely intense. It has so many incredible dystopian elements, which, you know, Shusterman is always just great at writing. It is very fast-paced. This is a plot-forward book. You will be turning the pages so fast. And it has so many mini, like, plot explosions, I guess. Like, there isn't one climax. I feel like this book is just filled with constant ups and downs where it's like a roller coaster that you are terrified of but don't want to get off. This is also a series that ups the ante. I read the first 2 books in this series this year and loved every single second of it. They're amazing. I cannot wait for the next installment. It will leave you breathless. Oh, it's crazy. It's so good. Next on my list is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, the first Brandon Sanderson book on my favorites of the year. I tried to keep it not all Brandon Sanderson, so bear that in mind. But this was a surprise for me. This is a book I've owned for a long time and have just kind of put off for various reasons. It's one of Brandon Sanderson's earlier novels, and for some reason I just never picked it up. But that finally changed this year, and boy oh boy, I'm just so happy I finally gave it a try. It has everything you love in a series. I mean, it has adventure, it has romance, it has plot intrigue. It's just absolutely incredible and filled with one of the most creative magic systems I've encountered in a while. There's also also a sequel coming out eventually, which is very exciting to me. But this is a story that follows two sisters who have grown up in this very austere kingdom. Their neighboring kingdom is their rival, and in contrast to them, they're very bright and bold, and they have a very different, not only political makeup, but religious makeup as well. The neighboring kingdom basically worships these gods come back to life, and above them all is this figure called the God King. These two kingdoms have had a very tumultuous relationship. In a way to keep peace between them, there's basically been an agreement where one of the sisters was promised to marry the God King when she came of age. The oldest sister was always supposed to have this responsibility, but the king at the very last minute switched and changed his mind and sent the younger sister to the kingdom to get married to the God King. So now we have a story that follows our two main female protagonists, one as she basically tries to figure out and navigate an incredibly complex political system that she was never trained for, as it was always supposed to be her sister, and two, an older sister trying to save her younger sister and basically take on tasks and learn to basically kind of refocus everything she's learned in her life and realize that people live different ways. On top of all of that, this world has an incredibly complex magic system. It's centered around the concept of breaths. Every one person has one breath. They cannot be stolen, they have to be freely given. And if you have more than one, colors basically become more vibrant, etc. And if you have a lot, you can basically reanimate inanimate objects, like make cloths come to life, etc. And people fight in this way. It's very cool and very interesting to read. There's also a huge side cast of characters. There's one other secondary main character that's kind of like the detective trying to uncover the mystery of what's going on in the court. It's just such a wonderfully well-crafted high fantasy novel that has so many twists and turns, and it really does have quite a romance element that I was not expecting and thoroughly enjoyed. Yeah, I just loved this book so much. I really love the sisterly bond. It just captivated me from page one. It was so good. Next up is the Bear and the Nightingale series by Katherine Arden. Again, a book series. I read the first two books this year. The third one comes out in early 2019 and I can't wait to finish it up. But this is a historical fantasy series set in Russia, I want to say in the 15th or 16th century, in a remote town in the first one. And our main character Vasya has only grown up on this compound. And in this town, old and new religion has always kind of intermixed. There's folklore and the new kind of Russian Orthodox religion kind of taking place in the same place. However, when Vasya's father gets remarried to a very devoutly religious woman, she basically says that she is going to try to banish all folklore magic from the town. However, when this happens, dark things begin to creep out of the forest, and Vasya realizes it's up to her to save everyone she loves. This is a story of a young girl coming into her own power, literally and like metaphorically. We see someone who's definitely kind of an outcast in this time and in her society. She's opinionated, she's strong, she doesn't want to conform to what is expected of her. That is grappled with really interestingly in this book. Vasya as a main character is fascinating to read through the first two novels as she's adventurous and spunky, but she also has to deal with the consequences both in her family and in society of her unladylike behavior. And that element is one of my favorite parts of this series. The historical element is really taken very seriously. It is something I really appreciate because of it, as Russian history is one of my favorite histories. Aside from the historical accuracy that was great in this novel, the atmosphere was also top-notch. I've said it before and I will say it a million times, this book will make you feel cold to your bones. I just feel like Katherine Arden did such a wonderful job painting the landscape of Russia, first in this really small town, but in the sequel really breaking it open to much more expansive landscapes. It's just been such a joy to read this year, and I loved the first two novels so much. Next up, I have Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir, a series where I read the first three novels out and loved every single second of it. This was a reread for me actually, and I fell in love with it so much more this year in 2018. But I just thought this is an incredible Roman-inspired dual perspective fantasy story that packs so much punch, has all the great elements of a YA fantasy, great romance, great plot, great spunky and intense characters with so many like, fate elements that just tear your characters apart in a way that just like hurts your soul but keeps you coming back for more. This is a story that follows our main two characters, Leia and Elias. Leia is part of a underclass group of individuals in this society. They have been oppressed for as long as she can remember. At the beginning of the story, her worst fears come true when her brother is arrested for treason. We'll follow our other main character, Elias, who is a part of this elite soldier group for the Empire, and he's basically tasked with keeping people in line. And their fates collide in very interesting and unexpected ways when Elias is about to graduate from his soldier school, and Leia begins to spy there because she agreed to become a spy for the rebellion after they promised to help break her brother out of prison. This is just a really great and well-crafted YA fantasy story. It's just explosive. I love the characters, as I've already said, and I just loved reading it this year. I flew through the first 3 books and I cannot wait for the next installment. It is just so good. Next up is a book that I just wish I wrote myself, and that is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This book is just amazing, okay? It's just amazing. This is actually a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, and this is another historical fantasy novel set in 15th, 16th century Russia. Clearly, I have a weak spot for books set during this time period, but this particularly follows 3 young women from 3 very different economic and social places. We follow a young Jewish girl who is the daughter of a moneylender. We follow another young girl who is the daughter of a farmer. Her father is very abusive and an alcoholic. And lastly, we follow a young girl who is the daughter of a very powerful lord. However, she is deemed not useful to him as she's not beautiful, therefore not really considered a great marriage prospect to help bring more power to his house. This story follows all 3 of these young women. All of their storylines collide in incredibly interesting of ways, but more than that, we follow 3 young girls in a time period where they're all oppressed in very different ways, but in very similar ways, rise up to their own power and to their own might, and they basically take names and they shut it down, okay? Additionally, this novel has some incredible fantasy elements, some truly interesting, like, keep you on the edge of your seat as this book unfurls. Also a beautiful cover, but yeah, I love this book so freaking much. And it's a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. I'll let you figure out how that plays out because it's kind of incredible, okay? This book is amazing. Next up is the very last book I read in 2018, and that is Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. Also just an incredible book with a very complex synopsis, but I will try to be fast. This is a fantasy novel that is inspired, in my opinion, by like Venetian history. It's set in this area called Foundry Side, and there are 4 main merchant houses that kind of control 80% of the land and 80% of the population. They hold all the power, and the remaining 20% is an area that is lawless, and that is where our main character lives, as she is not a part of any of these merchant houses, and she survives by being a thief. At the beginning of the story, she is hired to steal a very important artifact. She does it because she's a very good thief, and that basically pushes her into a bunch of political maneuverings that she was not anticipating or wanting to be a part of. This world also has a very interesting magic system. It's centered around the concept of scribing, which is a written language and basically always evolving as more words are discovered. And essentially you can transform items to think that they're something else, or basically redefine their laws, i.e. you can make a stone more like a piece of wood, make it float. You can make a stone wall 10 times stronger, etc., etc. I loved everything about this book. It's hilarious. It's gritty, violent, absolutely explosive, keeps you on the edge of your seat, highly creative. The magic system is just mind-boggling. Ever evolving, the author is able to constantly think of new scribings that just completely take you by surprise. And all in all, it is just the most fantastic first book to a series I have read in a while. I cannot wait to read the next books of this that are coming out hopefully soon. It combines elements of like ancient mystery and lost civilizations with this like new gritty trade, Venice, merchant house, political conflict. I don't know, guys. It was absolutely incredible. Such a great first novel to a very promising fantasy series that I cannot wait to read more books, hopefully next year and for many years to come. It was amazing. All right, we're heading into the home stretch. Only 3 books left. I cannot even imagine how long this video is. But the next book I'm going to talk about is City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy story that is just so good, to be quite frank. Obviously it's in my top 10. This is set in 18th century Cairo, and we follow our main character who quite frankly has never believed in magic. She has just been focusing on trying to survive and make ends meet and is a very talented con woman. However, in the very beginning of the story, she accidentally summons and releases a very powerful warrior genie. Now when she does this, she's basically swept away to an entirely new ancient city. It's wrapped up in a bunch of genie politics. The city is called Davabad, and the reason why this book was just so absolutely incredible and why I loved it so much this year is that the political system is absolutely enormous. The centuries upon century of political strife that exists within this city is no small feat and is not going to be resolved in 1 book, 2 books, and by one new main character from Cairo sweeping in and saving the day. That is why I'm so excited about this series. S.A. Chakraborty is able to create such incredible stakes and so much complex, like, political maneuverings and frustrations that you just can't help but turn the page because you don't know how they're gonna fix it. And don't take what I'm saying to imply that this book doesn't have a lot of action, because it does. It has a lot of action, but I do feel like its strength is within that political maneuvering and all of those complex, like, family strife that exists, but it has so much going for it and I loved every single second of it, and the sequel comes out really soon and I cannot wait to read it. Alright, so the next book I'm going to talk about is Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare, which I feel like is going to make many people's lists this year. This is the 3rd novel in the Dark Artifices trilogy, which is the 3rd full trilogy within the Mortal Instruments. I really enjoyed this book quite a bit. I would say it's honestly up there with the Infernal Devices. The more I think about it, the more I really love it. I feel like Cassandra Clare did so many effective things within this overall trilogy, but also in this book. One, she constantly is able to evolve the world she created so long ago, but continually build it and make it richer and more complex and modern, and is able to inject so many new, fresh ideas that not only revitalizes a lot of what she initially wrote and makes them still interesting and you care about storylines and characters from 8 books ago, but she's also able to kind of amend them to continuously make them fresh and relevant. But particularly speaking about the main characters of the Dark Artifices, Emma and Julian and the entire Blackthorn family, I just loved every second of it. Aside from having kind of the trademark romantic angst that kind of always exists within Cassandra Clare's trilogies, which, by the way, I know will always be there, but I will always love it. It always gets me and I can never stop reading because she's just so good at it. But she also adds so much elements of like familial love and conflict, like very realistic, heartbreaking familial situations that I feel like a lot of people can relate to on different levels. Loss, distance, misunderstanding, and also just like perseverance. I just really loved like everything that existed within this Dark Artifices trilogy, and I cannot wait for more future books. I'm just honestly so impressed by how Cassandra Clare is able to constantly evolve and expand this fantasy world, and she's doing such a good job. Bravo! And they're getting longer and longer. Alrighty guys, and the very last book I'm gonna talk about, the very last series I'm gonna talk about for what I read in 2018 is kind of like the Mac Daddy, if you will. Probably one of my, if not my favorite series of all time that I read. I read all 3 books this year. Should not be a surprise when I talk about The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson or the Stormlight Archives. I mean, this is one of like the fantasy epics of our time. The setup of this epic story is hard to describe only because it's so large and complex, but obviously at its heart it kind of has a true and classic motive. The world is at stake and there are people trying to save it, and obviously there's people trying to stop you from saving it. Good versus evil, kind of the classic battle, if you will. But this is a story that follows a large cast of characters, but basically 4 or 5 main characters, and each book kind of highlights one of those main characters in greater detail. One of the the most amazing things about this series is, even though it's huge, even though you're following so many characters and there's so many things going on, it is by no means difficult to follow. You are absorbed from page one, dying to know what happens. I don't want anyone to be intimidated by the size of the books or the series, because I promise it is just so easy to fall into and love. Everything about this world, from the characters to the magic system to the plot, is beautiful and perfect and amazing. I mean, this is like my favorite series I have ever read, and I have read a lot of books. So if you like fantasy or not, I really implore you to give this series a try, as I promise you won't be disappointed because it's perfect. So yeah. Alrighty guys, those are my top 10 favorite books of 2018. Let me know down below some of your favorite books of this past year, as I would love to know, and I'll see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye.